Hello there, cat people. Dan the Catman here. How are you? I'm recording video and audio for season 3. So welcome to episode 48 of the Shelter Cats podcast. And this is a quick recording that I'm going to be doing of an intro. This is the fanciest way we've ever recorded a podcast. So hopefully it works out. Hopefully you don't mind looking at me. So I'm Dan the Catman, and welcome to my kitchen recording studio. And so this is episode 48, and Michelle will be joining me shortly to record with today's guest. Today's guest is Stephen Quandt. I hope I'm saying that right. Stephen Quandt is the founder of Stephen Quandt Feline Behavior Associates, LLC, and is a certified feline training and behavior specialist through the Animal Behavior Institute. He is a professional cat behaviorist with over 20 years' experience working with cats in private consultations, animal shelters, and in the field. A background of nationwide rescue work with the ASPCA greatly enriched his empathy with communities of cat lovers in need of help. His current work with the Animal Care Centers of NYC, ACC, where I got my tailor, by the way, advances that compassionate connection. Stephen is the author of the children's book Happy Comes Home, and his website is catbehaviorhelp.com, and he's across social media. Just search Cat Behavior Help. He's on all the platforms. So he'll be joining us to talk about his background and how he became a cat behaviorist. He's been a particular help to me just this past week, which I'll record in a different episode. My tailor, who's sleeping over there, he's developed some dental issues at his ripe old age of somewhere between 14 and 16. He has bad gingivitis, and he has issues with his heart that are preventing him from having the teeth that he needs extracted, his fangs. I don't know why I just did this. So right now I'm dealing with keeping him comfortable, keeping his pain under control, and knock on wood, my table is wood, he's holding his own so far. He's eating, he's comfortable, he's still happy and purring. So, doing the best I can, keeping his pain under control while I consider next steps. It wasn't advised to put him through extraordinary surgery or anything like that. So Stephen was of particular help in just having someone to talk to who's been through that before. So we're very much looking forward to interviewing him. So without further ado, here is my interview with Michelle and Stephen Quandt. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
I am good, Dan. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. This is the most professional Shelter Cats podcast ever recorded thus far. So welcome. And we are here, Michelle the Meow Maven, and I'm Dan the Catman. And
morning.
Good morning. We're here with Stephen Quandt, and I think you are our first cat behavior professional.
I believe so. Yep.
That we've ever had on the show. So we definitely welcome your input, because we've had a lot of shelters. So how to adopt a cat, or the people that are in the weeds with rescue and with TNR and with finding cats homes. We've had a lot of those type of guests.
Okay.
We've had, kind of quirky people that have helped cats, that have standout cats, such as Michelle is the author of the book, The Farty Feline, which is about what it sounds like.
It's inspired by my very real cat, who is a very real farty feline.
Hysterical. Have you tried diet change? Have you ever attempted a different diet, Michelle?
I did. Well, you know what? So she was a rescue, and when she first came to me, it was awful. My mother was living with me at the time, and we were bringing her for her initial vet visit. And as soon as we got her in the carrying case, I've never smelt anything like this in my life. It was so horrible. My mother and I, in between gagging, we were laughing hysterically because it was just, I don't know what you do with it. So we brought her to the vet, everything checked out fine. And then we changed the diet here and there, went back and forth. What I've really determined was she was a nervous farter because the
Oh,
more that she's been here, the less she farts. So I've had her, I think maybe 6 years at this point, maybe 5 or 6 years at this point, and it's like been less and less. Every so often she does surprise me, but in general, she's good now. And she did have some kidney stones last year that we had removed, or earlier this year that we had removed. And she had an issue around that time, but now we're on a special diet for that. And so she's been pretty good. She's been pretty good.
all right.
I don't do that when I'm nervous, but I digress. Stephen, it's just to begin, can you just a very quick background on who you are?
Yeah, sure. I'm a former lighting designer for theater. I used to design lighting for off-Broadway, off-Broadway, a lot of regional theater. It's how I met my husband. In fact, I joke, but it's true. We met on a show, Great Expectations, in New Jersey, and in a rehearsal space in New York. I was passing through a room that was covered in hoop dresses, and I tripped, and I fell on my butt, and I looked up, and my future husband was staring at me with this beatific smile.
Oh,
Over 31 years ago.
Oh my God.
But over time, I started going from just being a cat parent. We were, cat parents, to volunteering with rescue groups, and then everything kind of changed when I went out as a volunteer with the ASPCA to the site of the Joplin tornado. Joplin, Missouri, 2011. It was an EF5 tornado. It was one of the worst tornadoes in kind of modern American history. Hundreds of people were killed, and 1,200 cats and dogs were taken into our care. And I was a volunteer responder. And just like in war, there are battlefield commissions, right? Someone gets killed and the next person gets promoted. Well, in about a week, I was promoted to being in charge of the cat shelter, which went from 100 cats to 400 plus, 425 cats.
So trial by fire, for sure.
Trial by fire, absolutely. And when that was over, I was given a contract to be a freelance responder with the team, Field Investigations and Response. And I went around the country on large-scale cruelty, criminal cases, and disaster cases through until 2018, and got lots of training and other things related to animals, medical training. I worked in the medical division for most of my time with them. And after coming back essentially from a case in Iowa near the winter, where I had 18 chemical body warmers, those little hand warmers that I had 18 of them distributed around my body. And I came home and I was like, I'm getting too old for this. I need full-time work. And I ultimately found a job doing cat behavior with the Animal Care Centers of New York City, the shelter that's contracted by the city of New York. And then the pandemic hit, and I got additional training and certifications in cat behavior, feline behavior. And that's kind of how we got to today.
Wow.
Did you have cats growing up?
No, I did not. I had a dog. I as a young age, I got a corgi, and I named her Corgi. And we did kind of...
Hey, convenient.
Yeah, right. We did foster a cat in Maine one summer and found her a home, but we couldn't bring her back with us because of our dog.
Right.
But that was my first experience with a cat. There were others after that. But after Tom and I moved in together, that's when we decided to adopt. And we did.
So,
Stephen, I had 2 cats one time, 2 brothers, and I named them, you ready for this? Brace yourself.
Yeah.
I named them Chat and Gato.
That's sweet. I like it. That's great.
So I understand your corgi named Corgi because I had 2 cats named Cat and Cat.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I like that. I'd have to name all mine Rescue and Rescue and Rescue. And Shelter Cat and Shelter. It would get confusing. Shelter Cat, come here. And they'd all look at me. What?
Well, it's something that's not well known is that I talk about certain cats that have come into my life. Like the first cat, the first time I understood what it was like to relieve suffering in another creature
Mm.
was at the Joplin tornado, and I named that cat Penelope. Um, and although that's not quite right, I'm completely. You know what? I'm going to just skip that story for now. I'll come back to it later.
No problem. I'm sure it's a great story. So, in that whole trial by fire, how did you kind of hone in on cat behavior as a passion? Because that's your trajectory ever since is focusing on cat behavior. So, what is it about that you became passionate about?
That's a great question. What I started focusing on cat behavior when I started working at the city shelter, and then I started to become very vested in cat happiness, essentially,
Mm.
because I worked with a lot of cats who were, essentially not happy due to all the various circumstances that they were in at the shelter, and I became increasingly vested in good outcomes for animals, and for cats specifically, and it became sort of intertwined with my own life in a meaningful way. And then during COVID, I was laid off at a certain point during COVID, and I started focusing on private work and also doing I started doing webinars through the Airbnb online experience platform, which no longer exists. But for a while, you could click on any subject: cooking, singing, creative writing. There was a whole animal section dedicated to all sorts of different animals. And I would do like a group class where I would help people. And I also had a presentation, a webinar presentation, which I still give through public libraries and companies. But during COVID, that's where I really started focusing on private individuals, private clients, and helping them and their cats. And it just became very meaningful to me.
And that's primarily what you do now. You have private clients that you.
Yes, it's a mix. I have private clients. I work 3 days a week at the city shelter, so in that sense, I'm doing public work, both with cats and with our clients. And then I also have another section of my work which is webinar based. I have a couple different webinars that I give, and that's also just part of my professional life.
And is there there's I could ask a day's worth of cat behavior questions. Having had cats 25 years, Michelle, I know you've had cats
Whole life.
your whole life as well. Is there a particular, I'm going to ask you a few, but is there one type of cat behavior? The biggest question I get asked is, how do I introduce a second cat, or how do I adopt my first cat? Is there one particular aspect of cat behavior that you deal with the most, or you advise the most, or you think needs the most exposure or help?
So just to be clear, you mentioned that you've had many different topics on this show, and I like to joke that as a feline behavior consultant, I can talk about anything. And I do. I can literally I can just go on and on essentially forever. No one has ever actually found my limit, my point where I'm like, I'm done. I can't talk about cats anymore today. I've yet to find that
Same with
point.
us.
Even adoption strategies. I just advised a client on adoption strategies. As people don't realize, you don't go at the end of the day on a weekend. You're not going to have a good experience. Go if you can, go on a weekday and go when they open. All the cats are available and the staff are not exhausted. But to your question, the number one thing that people come to me about if they want to, basically hire me to do consulting with them, there may be people with other problems that are statistically frequent, but I don't get asked them because it's not important enough to spend a certain amount of money on. But the number one question I get is about cat-to-cat introductions, specifically, usually almost always about introductions that have gone badly. It's rare that I get a client who's thinking about getting a cat. I love it. I love it when someone comes to me and says, I'm ready to get, and this just happened this week, a repeat client is ready to get a buddy for their buddy named Wally. And I got to start at ground zero, at the beginning with that, before there's a problem. There are all these internet guides, right? All these web-based how to introduce two cats.
Sure.
And so they always assume success. They never talk to you about what to do if it's not working.
Mm.
And there's some fundamental things in most of those plans that are not great. A couple things that I think that are not great. And so that's the number one question I get. I have a really detailed guide that goes beyond really pretty much anything you'll just find as a standalone document on the internet, on the web. And the second biggest question I get is about litter box behavior, inappropriate elimination, or spraying, which is not the same thing as inappropriate elimination. And those two questions make up easily 90% of why people talk to me.
So what is the best way to introduce two cats? Because I can tell you from my experience, I have 7. Whatever they tell you to do, it has never worked out the way you plan it. For me, it eventually works out, but there's definitely points where I'm like, why did I do this? So what is the best? What is in a nutshell, the best way to introduce a new cat to your resident cat?
Sure. And, to your point that it's never gone the way you expected, it's like the War College maxim that goes, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. Right?
Yeah.
So I'll try and give it to you in a nutshell. First, I have an analogy, which is that every time you are able to curate or design a positive interaction between two cats, you're putting money in the bank. And we want money in the bank. It's good. We can spend it on things. It's a nest egg. It's a cushion. And every time there's a negative interaction, you're pulling money out of the account, which is bad. And if you introduce two cats and the first thing that happens is a negative interaction, you've just gone into debt.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even, you're negative cushion. And what we're trying to do is create these designed moments between them. If you allow me part A and part B, I'll
Please.
talk a little bit about the designed interactions in part B. But in part A, we're trying to create these positive moments. They might be very brief, but if they're 2 or 3 times, let's say 3 times a day for 5 minutes or less, right? That's 5 to 15 minutes a day. But after a week, that's 20 plus interactions. And after 2 weeks, it's 40. And to the extent that we're creating all these positive little moments between them, what we're doing is we're creating a library of positive memories, because what we're trying to do is get our cats to have a positive emotional response to seeing the other cat. And that's only going to happen if they have forgotten the negative part. Mm. And every time they have a negative interaction that's reasonably significant, it's like resetting back to zero. All those positive memories are kind of ruined. And so we're trying to create this lengthy memory set that it essentially creates a conditioned response that allows for improvement. That's part A. Part B is, how do we do that? And the guides on the web all talk about things like closing the door and scent exchange and territory swapping and feeding them their meals on opposite sides of the door closer and closer until they tolerate that, and then going to a barrier that allows eyesight, like a baby gate, or better would be a screen. There's screen doors you can get for cats. And then eventually supervised interactions where they're in the same room. And I talk about some other things. One, I don't like to talk about scheduled meals because eating is a survival mechanism for cats. They have to do it. And so if you use the scheduled meal as a part of the interaction, you're forcing them to do what they have to do in order to get their meal, but they're doing it across from this other cat that is causing them a lot of stress. And even though counter conditioning, which is pairing something good with something not good to have the good thing operate on the thing that isn't good, when it's a scheduled meal, it's introducing a stressor that should be stress-free. So I would rather you use high-value treats between meals to help them get along, so that at least their scheduled meals are free of tension or anxiety. But the other thing that I talk about are using 3 different tools that you never see really discussed, at least not explicitly on the internet guides. And that is distance, duration, and intensity/movement. So how far apart they are, if you get them too close, there's going to be a threshold where there's discomfort. And if you allow them to be in some form of contact with each other, even at a significant distance for too much time, that's the duration part of it, they're
Right.
going to get tense. And if the movement/intensity, that means, if they're too active, that's going to be stressful for them. A cat who lunges at the other cat is way too stressful.
Yes.
And so by manipulating these 3 ideas, you can create positive interactions. They might be at a certain distance for a certain amount of time with limited movement, but you're creating the positive memory. And the other thing that I like to talk about is creating normalizing behaviors. In other words, instead of having them focus on each other during these sessions, it's nice to get them to focus on something else, like what's called a pattern game, which is a food-related game that the cat can interact with, that the other cat can see, but they don't have to go eye to eye with each other. They're just watching each other and learning from each other. And they're going, oh, this cat can come a little bit closer to me and then goes farther away from me. And he's doing things that are not threatening to me. And I'm secretly watching him. And I'm secretly learning from this, even though I may not be demonstrating it to you at the moment.
That is very interesting.
Well, that's fascinating. It's like,
I have to give me a second when I can digress back to that original story, but
yeah.
I can hold off for a moment.
Because my tailor, who Stephen, we've talked about, my death row rescue, he loves YouTube, particularly a particular channel where the person removes hornets' nests from people's homes, and he loves to whack the TV screen as the bees are flying around, or the hornets, and he interacts with the TV so much where I sent the video to the host of the YouTube channel, and he thought it was awesome. And I think he put it on his TikTok of my 15-year-old Taylor sitting in the living room whacking the hornets on the TV like it was one of those, whack-a-mole games. And my foster was watching him, fascinated, and I couldn't decide if she thought he had a screw loose or if it was the most fun thing she's ever seen, because he's just, the big TV in my living room, he's just whacking the screen every bee that came in, and it was the best thing he's ever done. It was the best time of his life. So when you were discussing that, new cat watching resident cat interact, that's what popped in my mind. Would that be like a kind of an example?
Yeah, that could actually be a training tool, because what it does is it gives the other cat, the cat who's not swatting the hornets, the opportunity to see Taylor doing something on his own. And he can the other cat can sit there kind of quietly watching this and go, wow, he's not threatening me. He's just playing whack-a-mole on a TV screen. So yeah, that would be an example of an interaction where you're doing normalizing behaviors and allowing the cats to learn from each other. Cats do learn by imitation. That's one of the ways in which cats learn. They're also what's called latent learners, which means that they take in behavioral lessons without demonstrating back to you what they're learning, when sometimes a cat seems to have an epiphany and all of a sudden they get something, or they understand something, or they're better. It isn't necessarily just because they've had an epiphany. It is also because they're latent learners. They've been learning the lesson over time, and they then get to the point where they demonstrate it.
I was also thinking about when you were saying the distance. So right now I just have one cat. My previous one, we had to put him down a couple months ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
It's so hard.
He was also a rescue. They both came to me about 10 years old each, and But anyway, I had him first. His name was Legs. I had him first, and then I introduced Delilah. And it was a little tense at first, but then I have a sectional sofa in my living room. So eventually, they'd start to see each other more and more. But then what they would do is one would sit on one end of the sofa, one would sit on the other exact opposite end of the sofa. And then eventually they would move a little bit closer and then a little bit closer. And then sometimes they swat at each other. They just kind of, have a little conversation. But then, then eventually they started snuggling with each other and then, sleeping right next to each other. So I was thinking of the distance thing where that was like a perfect, I actually have a picture of the two of them on opposite ends of the sofa. And it almost looked like they were like an old married couple that got in a fight and they, you go to your side, I'll sit on my side. But
Adorable.
it was a sweet moment because that was kind of like one of the first times they were in the same room together, let alone on the same piece of furniture, kind of interacting from a distance, but not a lot, just kind of seeing each other.
Yeah, well, you got lucky, right? There are lots of times when that just isn't going to happen, where one cat is going to lunge after the other cat, but you got lucky, which is great. I also like to mention to people that if we look at cats in nature, it's always good to look at cats in nature.
Yeah.
I tell people there are no behavior problems with cats who live outdoors. They're behaviors, but there really aren't behavior problems. It's when we artificially put them in our homes and we confine them in certain ways that some cats react poorly to that. But in nature, when a cat wants to join a colony, they typically come to the edge of the colony and wait for permission from the cat who's in charge or the cats that are in charge to come in.
Right.
And the distance between where the incoming cat is at the edge of the colony to where the resident cats are living is significantly greater than any distance that we have inside our home. So when we're introducing two cats, we are automatically essentially starting off on the wrong foot because we're putting them closer together than they would put themselves if they were given the choice outside.
Yeah.
That's funny you mentioned that. My Sophie, she's just off camera, passed out. I had a cat named Jackson, he passed about 7 years ago. And when she first came here, she was in the bedroom and that was her world. And she hid for a few days and then she gradually took over the bedroom. And I wanted to introduce them slowly based on, what I had read, what the shelters told me. And instead of like a controlled visit, Jackson took it upon himself to bolt into the bedroom, run under the bed, and confront her.
Oh.
Before I could even say, yo, wait a second, I want to introduce you. So he said, to hell with this, ran under the bed, and it was horrible. It was, as you can imagine, very stressful for both of them. And she never quite forgave him. And they lived together a good 4 or 5 years. And she never quite forgave him for that first impression.
Yeah.
They tolerated each other. They would share a couch together. When he got sick, she kind of looked after him and would clean him. So she cared for him, but she was never his best friend. And I always think, was it because, Dummy decided to just charge in? Hi, I'm Jackson. You're going to love me. Is a first impression like that? Am I making that up? That it could be?
Well, we'll never know with your cats. It's hard to say. But yeah, first impressions can make a difference. Cats can make a decision about another cat that essentially becomes a decision that it's not going to reverse itself. But your cats ultimately got along at least reasonably well. But this is generally why I love it when someone contacts me before they get the second cat, because that's what I'm going to stop. I'm not going to let that happen. And then we also talk about things like harness training and other sorts of barriers and such. But yeah.
My Sophie also didn't like my ex-girlfriend, so she might just be a very good judge of character. So, but anyway, so you get people who you get clients. No, she disliked her intensely. Do you get people who already have a cat and are seeking advice on behavior with that cat or introducing a second cat, do you get people who haven't even adopted yet? Because that's also a very big question, is what's your advice on getting your first cat? Because 2 years ago, I convinced a friend who hadn't had a cat in 10 years that she has a young daughter who's about 6 or 7. And I think by law, everyone should grow up with at least one pet, cat or dog or something. How would you advise somebody, this might be a loaded question, to
No, it's fine.
adopting getting into cats for the very first time? Is there like a particular set of advice you give or can give?
So to your first question, no, most clients aren't cat free when they hire me, although
That's what I thought.
sometimes they do want help with selecting a second cat. So to your other question, there's a bunch of things. So I'm very much personality oriented. So I always want people to think about what's the personality, temperament, and energy level of the cat that they want. Do they want a very playful cat, a little bit a crazy cat? Do they want a couch potato? Do they want a sweet, loving cat, a needy cat? Some cats are very needy. They want to be with you all the time. And some people, that just drives them crazy. Other people love it. So think about personality is the first thing, not appearance, and definitely not gender, right? Excuse me. Gender is probably the least informative physical aspect of a cat. Other things that are,
Interesting.
breed is sometimes instructive. Color can sometimes be instructive, right? There's the
Orange cat.
old, right? Well, and versus calicos or torties, who sometimes can be a little bit spicy, but not in a way that's really predictive, because you don't want to hurt the feelings of all the sweet and loving torties and calicos out there by saying these are spicy cats, because it's not true. Generalities that we make are not good at predicting individuals. They're good when you look at a cohort, a group, right? And you can say more cats in this group are going to be this way than cats in another group. But back to your question. So I talk to people about selecting for personality and temperament and energy level. Then often we talk about age. Lots of people want kittens. Not everybody. Not everyone wants a kitten. And some people even want older cats. But personality development is not well developed typically in young kittens. And the older they get as kittens, the more you start to see personality. And so if you want a certain personality, you're just not going to know really what you get if you get an 8, 10, 12-week-old kitten. They all tend to be lovable, cute, playful, right? But some will be lap cats. Some will be very needy. Some will be independent. Some will be playful. Some might even be nervous. I talk about cats being on the scale of confidence versus fearfulness. Our cats are both predators and prey at the same time. And some cats think like predators, and some think like they're prey, and they're just inherently more nervous. So young kittens, you're not going to really know that. But even not infrequently with private clients, there's a new behavior problem, and I ask how old the cat is. That's one of the questions I'll ask, and the answer almost always is the cat is 2 or 3. And everyone talks about kitten development as birth to a year, with adolescence being in the second half of that. Right. Adulthood is 1 year and up, but there's another category that no one talks about unless you talk to people like me, and that is something called social maturity. And guess how? And that's where there is a place in the cat's development where new things can come out in terms of personality. And guess how old cats typically are when they hit social maturity?
3.
Very good, Michelle. Yeah, 2 to 4.
Well done.
2 to 4, with 2 to 3 being more common. Yeah. And so if you really, really super want to know what your cat's personality is like, go for a little bit older than 2. Maybe 3, or maybe 3 to 4. But another important thing, Dan, is getting the known history of a cat, if there is known history, right? Because with it, we know things about cats, whether they were in another home, or maybe the shelter or the rescue has experience with that cat. So I also like to talk about what's the known history of this cat. And is the cat able to be picked up? Some cats are super friendly and they hate being picked up. And being picked up is relatively important for things like going to the vet, and can be meaningful also to people just because they like to pick up their cats. But can the cat be picked up? Can the cat go into a carrier fairly easily? And is the cat free of behavioral challenges that you may not want? And there, there's a list of behavioral challenges that cats sometimes have. And like at ACC, we do a behavior determination on our cats. We basically evaluate them. We give them a number, and that number talks about how experienced the home should be. And because we're trying to do a good match, because we, like pretty much every rescue and shelter, we take our animals back if it doesn't work out. So
Right.
we'd rather it work out. So that means that we try and disclose everything we know, and we try and match you up correctly. A lot of people talk about forever homes, forever, right?
Mhm.
And in kind of, to my way of thinking, in modern progressive animal welfare, we talk about matchmaking.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work out, it is okay to make a proactive, affirmative decision on behalf of that cat and the family to find a new home for that cat, where we've learned enough that we can then target that cat for a better matched home. The crazy, super playful cat that was adopted to grandma who lives by herself is not necessarily the right match. And maybe that cat should go to a family with a bunch of kids. So those are some of the strategies that I talk about.
Well, that was when I got Delilah. She was actually, I say a rescue, but it was a friend of a friend rescued her off the street that she lived on. So she was in a home, but the people kept putting her outside. And if you remember, a few years ago, we had that really awful winter where it was below zero for weeks on end, and it was just
Right.
freezing. And this girl would find this cat just outside in the middle of the night, 0 degrees, 10 degrees, and she would try to bring the cat back to the home. And then the cat, eventually they just stopped answering the door. They never would take the cat back in. And the girl couldn't keep her. So she, I ultimately wound up, getting her. So in that situation, I went in totally blind. I went to go meet the cat one day when the girl had her at her house, and I could see that she was very lovable. She was snuggling up to the girl, and she was, very lovable, skittish, because, she didn't know what was going on, and, but super, super lovable. So when we got her home, I'm like, okay, she's going to be, a lovable cat. And she ultimately was. Like, she snuggles with me. She's like my little teddy bear every night. Like, we sleep all curled up. But she doesn't like to be picked up. She loves to be held, but she does not like to be picked up. So if I sit, she'll come to me and I can hold her on my lap. She'll sit with me for, hours on end and snuggle and, make her biscuits on my lap and, everything. And then, but to pick her up, if I squat down, try to pick her up, or bend down and try to pick her up, she bolts across the room. So it's just something that I know about her. I know that something about that behavior scares her. So I try not to do that unless I have to. I just recently had to give her, she had some kind of infection I had to give her antibiotics for. And she had an ulcer in her eyeball, which was lovely. So I had to put ointment in her eye. That's not fun.
No.
So,
Not at all.
so for that, I had to pick her up. And then, of course, every time I went to go pick her up for that, she would run and she would run. But eventually we kind of like settled into a little routine and I was able to do it. And she didn't run as quickly. But yeah, it's just, it is fascinating. Even the previous cat was the same thing. He came to me from a home. There were about a granddaughter inherited like 7 cats and several dogs. Didn't have any previous vet information, no behavioral, nothing. So it was like, okay, we'll see what happens.
Right. Yeah.
It's a roll of the dice. But sometimes, and I got very lucky with both of these cats because he was also very friendly. She's very friendly. Those are the two that sat on opposite sides of the sofa. But I love this one to death. She is just the sweetest. I'm so happy she came into my life because she is like the snuggliest thing.
But to your point, being lifted off the ground is not a natural experience for a cat.
Right.
And if they haven't been taught, socialized to be picked up off the ground, they may never really tolerate it.
Yeah. Yep.
My Sophie will let me pick her up. My others do not like it at all. And again, they're sweet, they're cuddly on their own terms. They'll hang out with me. Half the time I have an inch and a half on my bed. Sophie will sit on my shoulders. Taylor will just become this anvil, this like heavy piece of metal, and he'll just hit it. My Tucker, who's a big tabby, if I hold his feet away from me, because his claws come out, I could hold him, but his back has to be to my chest. And he'll tolerate it for like 5 minutes before he starts wriggling. The rest of them, not a chance.
Both my cats tolerate being picked up. My blind from birth girl, Jenny.
Oh.
Yeah, and there's no sympathy needed. She runs the house. She's in charge of everything. She's very smart, has incredible spatial memory, and she does spatial mapping. I could do a whole segment with you on what it's like to have a blind from birth cat.
I saw her on your shoulders on one of your YouTubes.
Yeah, that's where she likes to. That's where she likes to sit. She likes to sit on on our shoulders.
I had no
She's
idea she was blind until you mentioned it. That was awesome.
And she even has her own Facebook and Instagram. Jenny the blind cat with a J, all one word, no underscores between words. That's a different blind cat named Jenny.
So there's so many behavior questions I want to ask. Do you mind if I kind of almost rapid fire a couple of examples?
Yeah, sure. We can do speed dating. Okay. It's like speed dating.
I have a list, but I'm gonna start with mine. My Vance he's an orange cat. I know your legs, Michelle, was orange and white.
Yep.
I always have a soft spot for him. Vance was a colony cat. He was bullied and chased, and a rescue got him off the streets because he was always very friendly with humans. And I foster failed him 2.5 years ago. His nickname is Mr. Jealous Boy. If he sees any other, it's not aggressive, but he gets so extremely jealous if I give anybody else attention, to the point where he has to muscle his way in, and he'll kind of take over, me, and the other cat will be like, forget this, I'll come back later.
Dan Legs did the same exact thing.
How can you explain? He has swiped at the other cat if they insist on staying in that cuddle session. How do you deal with the cat that is? He's the cuddliest, he's the sweetest, I love him, but he's so damn jealous. Is there a way to deal with that without hurting his feelings, so to speak?
Well, first, I have to step us back a little bit, because it is normal for us to talk about all sorts of things with cats in terms of human emotions, even thought and language. We anthropomorphize. It's the natural thing to do, but we don't know that they're specifically jealous in the way that humans are jealous. Jealousy in humans really is about, I'm upset that you love or appear to love this other person more than me. And it creates a very specific emotional response. But cats don't always share resources well. And one way to, and that means that they get some degree of stress, right? We know that they can get stressed. Right. What it exactly feels like, it's hard for me to say, because as much as I like to say that I feel like I am a cat, I'm not really a cat. And by the way, if you ask me to do an imitation of my favorite cat vocalization, you might be able to get me to do that, but maybe not. But to your question,
we're going to come back to
that. Okay. It's hard because he didn't do well on the street. He was not an alpha cat. He was picked on, and so on a certain level, he may see other cats as a threat, and then he sees you giving them attention, and it produces some degree of stress. And there's no easy answer to this. Honestly, you could try doing little sessions where he and you and the other cat are both all together, and you're kind of co-petting them at the same time while giving out treats. But honestly, You might have a little effect in the margins, but it sounds like this is a baked-in response that is just kind of there.
Yeah, and again, it's not aggressive. It's just he could be fast asleep. If I'm even looking at another cat, he'll wake up and he'll literally bolt over. I think what you said, it's ingrained in him. Maybe it's something from his. If he wasn't nice, he wouldn't get food from. Because my friend who rescued him was also the colony feeder. So she knew of him for a good year because he was TNR'd first before he came to me. So that's interesting that you say it could be just a baked in. That's just could be part of his personality.
It might create insecurities in him. It'd be very interesting if you got a cat plush toy and you a stuffed animal that looks like a cat and is in the right size. And if you showed this stuffed toy attention while he could see it, if he would react in the same way. It would be interesting to see if he transferred that emotional response to something that is actually not living because it looked enough like a cat. I'm not saying that we can do much with that.
Interesting.
But it would, from a behavior point of view, from my point of view, it would be interesting as a test to see how ingrained it is, because we do know that cats can react to things that are similar to, but not exactly the same as.
Michelle, now you know what to get me for my birthday coming up is a
I do for Christmas. Yes.
stuffed cat. Litter box issues is another pretty big. I'm knocking on wood table. I don't know, Michelle, if you could speak to this differently. My cats haven't had much litter box issues. I had a cat years ago that if he didn't like one of my friends, he would crap at their feet.
Oh my God.
literally that was my tiger, also an orange cat. If I had a friend over, if he didn't like that person, he would literally at their feet leave them a pile of stuff.
No, I've had two cats that I'll say had litter box issues. One of them, my previous cat, I had her for 20 years. She passed away several years ago. If she didn't like the actual litter I was using, she would not go in the box. Didn't matter if it was new. She'd pee and poop right outside of the box. So she was very particular about the actual litter. Once I found one she liked, I just stuck with it, and she was fine. And then Legs, the one that I just had to put down a few months ago, he was peeing all over the house. But I realized that because he had a lot of medical issues leading up to his passing. So I think that a lot of that had to do with the medical issues, that he wasn't getting to the box on time, that he was just going to some place that was comfortable or familiar and just taking care of his business. So, but other than that, they're okay.
So what are the biggest, because I hear, litter box issues can lead to a cat being brought back or to be rehomed.
Common reason. I can also tell you the most common reasons for surrendering a cat, but yeah. I'll let you pose your question first.
But what are the biggest litter box, because not every cat's going to dislike a friend and crap at their feet. What are the biggest litter box issues, and what's your advice on how to deal with them so that you don't reach that point where you want to part company with the cat?
Right. So, it's a complicated subject. It's a messy subject. It's a smelly subject.
Yep. Sure is.
But it is a complicated subject. But we can break it down into a couple things. One is litter box dissatisfaction. Whether it's the box, the location, the style of box, the substrate, in other words, the litter,
right,
the number of boxes, things like that. And cats who pee or poop right outside the box are generally demonstrating that there's something about the setup they don't like. If they go in other parts of the home, that usually points to other issues that may be stress related or anxiety related. Anything from separation anxiety to too many cats in the home to things like that. There can be a medical component, right? We generally want to make sure a cat doesn't have a UTI or crystals in the urine or a cystitis, which is an inflammation of the bladder. There's spraying behavior, which is not the same thing as inappropriate elimination. When a cat urinates typically small amounts of urine on vertical surfaces like a wall. They typically back up to this wall. Their tail is up and quivering, and they direct a small urine stream. That is either sexual marking or territorial marking, and up to 10% of male cats who are neutered who spray, or excuse me, 10% of male cats who are neutered who go outside the box are spraying, even though they've been neutered. And female cats can do this as well. And so there are all of those components. There's some unusual components, like if a cat pees in your bed or on your clothing or articles that come and go from the home or at your front door. That often references something called associative marking. People think the cat's trying to punish you when in fact they're trying to improve their relationship with you. They might be missing you on some level. It's kind of like the flip side to separation anxiety. They're trying to give you their love potion. So instead of punishing the cat, which is never a good idea anyway,
Right.
we want to work on improving our relationship with the cat. That might mean the amount of time we spend with them, the quality time we spend with them, to address that. So there are all of those issues. There can also be baked in issues like the smell of the urine. You haven't cleaned it well enough. People don't always clean well enough and use the correct enzyme cleaners and even a black light to detect residual stains. And because it's so complex, all those things that I've just mentioned and more, I have a questionnaire on my website for litter box behavior that is lengthy. And I ask people to fill it out because I want to be able to see which direction we're moving in so that I can kind of correctly identify what the stressors are, what the causes may be, so that we can work on that. But it's kind of a full bore approach. With litter box behavior, you really need to go at it in a focused and intensive sort of way because it is a leading cause of surrender. So, yeah.
And how do you deal with people who have separation anxiety issues in cats?
Excuse me. It depends a little bit on if we're talking about if they're just going to work during the day or if it's a trip. They're gone for a week. So if it's a trip, it might be dealt with by the type of cat sitter you have. In other words, someone who maybe lives in your home as opposed to just visits twice a day. It may involve things like doing a soft exit. This is often, for people, what they do is they give their cat lots of attention and petting and kissing and smushing and I love you, and then they leave. And so the cat goes from feeling really loved to really alone really quickly. And sometimes you can solve separation anxiety issues just by ghosting them, by not interacting with them in the half an hour or so before you leave, doing a quiet exit and not doing all the things that signal to your cat that you're leaving. Get your bag ready, your keys ready the night before. Don't do all those obvious things that you're leaving. Sometimes it requires medication,
Right.
talking to your vet. By the way, before we're done today, Dan, you've got to give me 1 minute to explain my first story that I didn't really get to because I was using the wrong name of a cat. So when we're down to a minute, let me know.
Absolutely, I will.
And we're going to come back to the imitation as well, the cat call. Just
and you said questionnaire, so good place to plug. Your website is
catbehaviorhelp.com. That's all one word, catbehaviorhelp.com.
And that's where the questionnaire is, and everything
is
on
located,
how to find you.
Yeah. Under services, there's a drop down, and questionnaires is one of the options.
Obviously, the big is probably the other biggie is scratching and destructive behavior, furniture. I have scratch walls all over my house for them because they all seem to want to scratch vertically as opposed to my Sophie hated my ex-cat. She likes to scratch on the floor. Almost everybody else likes to scratch vertically, so I have them hung up all over my home.
Great.
They almost somebody asked, "Are you soundproofing? What is that stuff?" So
look like that. That's funny.
So that's another, along with litter box, that's probably another big one that leads to cats being returned. How do you advise? Because again, also look up on the web, like WebMD. There's any sort of advice or YouTube's on how to deal with that. How do you advise somebody that comes to you? He's destroying all my stuff. I don't know what to do.
So not in a dissimilar way, and I should mention it's not a leading cause of surrendering.
Okay.
Actually, it might be a complaint, but it's typically, people get used to it. They give up. Their sofa becomes a pincushion, right? And
Yeah.
that's just kind of the way it is.
I'm happy to hear that, actually.
So,
that they don't.
But there's the carrot and the stick. The carrot is coaxing your cat to an appropriate scratching surface that addresses what they want. That might mean vertical, horizontal, angled, could mean textured cardboard, it could mean carpet, it could mean sisal, or even soft wood. And teaching them that every time they scratch in the right place, they get a treat. This is, basic conditioning, right? I scratch, I get a treat. Every time I scratch there, I get a treat. And you keep a bag of treats near the scratching surface. And the stick is doing something that, I don't like to generally recommend aversive techniques, but something that's very mildly aversive that isn't connected to you. It's called remote correction. Getting double-sided sticky tape and putting it on the furniture where the cat likes to scratch. They touch it, doesn't feel good. And at that moment, you can redirect them to the post and let them scratch there, play with a toy, use catnip. And as soon as they scratch, you give the treat. You have to give the treat right away because cats are smart, but their brains are the size of walnuts. And if you don't give the reward really quickly, they're not going to make that positive association. And then you can do something that's really quite sophisticated on a psychological level, which is the essentially randomized reward. It's you stop rewarding them every time they scratch on the post. And what this does is it causes them to scratch more because they're like, why am I not getting the reward? And so then they start to engage in the behavior even more. And then you start giving them randomized treats. It's the irregular schedule of reward. And it makes use of a technique, a positive use of a behavior principle that I call the slot machine effect. If that's when a cat kind of tries to randomly get something from you, they meow at the door, your bedroom door, and you don't open it until eventually you do. Well, they're basically putting money in the slot machine and pulling the handle until you finally open the door. And when you do, you've taught them that it takes 5 minutes before you give in. And if you don't open the door, what do? They meow harder, right? Because they think that reward is just around the corner. Well, that's when you do it with like a scratching post, you're doing that same technique, but geared towards getting them to do the behavior more in order to get that reward.
My Tucker will just open the bedroom door. He's kind of like to the point where sometimes the door handle, I have to tighten it like twice a year because he'll eventually open the door to the point where I don't close the bedroom door anymore. Because my other cat was so annoyed I closed the bedroom door. He pulled the door jamb off the doorway. So my door to my bedroom is missing door jamb on one side because I got so tired of pulling it off, I just took it off. And I stopped closing the bedroom door to go to sleep because Tucker will just literally, with the patience of a saint, will sit there with his paws and figure out a way to open the door handle and open the door. And there's Delilah.
Here's my little farty feline. Say hi.
Gorgeous.
She's another one of our co-hosts, by the way.
Yeah.
She was out sleeping on the sun porch, and she just decided to come in and visit me. So
nice.
Which kind of leads me to just two more I'm going to ask you. Being woken up too early by your cat. I'm sure, Michelle, you as well. Is there anything you can do? Because I've given up. They wake me up.
So there's actually generally a pretty quick and easy solution. So all species have methods of calorie retention, not just calorie acquisition, right? But how they retain calories. And as an example, seagulls drop clamshells on rocky beaches from basically just the right height. If they flew too high, they'd waste too much energy, and if they flew too low, they'd have to try again. And either way, they would eventually starve. So they've learned where to drop their clamshells from. And cats also have a method of retaining calories. And that is they engage in what I call the cycle of predation. They hunt, they kill, they eat, and then what do? They sleep. And that's not by chance. Nature has said to them, basically told them, I need you to go to sleep, because if you run around without hunting, you're wasting all those hard-earned calories. There are 42 species of cats in the world, and they all sleep more than they're awake, and that is to retain calories. So if your cat wakes you up late at night or early in the morning, what we want to do is engage them in the cycle of predation about an hour before your bedtime. That means we play with them, play being a substitute for hunting. After the play session, depending on your cat, it might be a short play session, maybe it's a longer play session, but after the play session, they get a meal, not even just a snack. This is where you introduce, if you're only feeding twice a day, everyone has different feeding strategies, but this is, at least for the time being, part of this behavior technique. You give them the meal, which, taken in that order, they played, they hunted, they got the food, now they have to sleep. And on top of that, not only is the sleep switch engaged, but in cats who live outside, they eat easily 8 to 15 times a day. 8 to 12 times a day is common.
Okay.
And some of us free feed, which kind of replicates that in a sense, but others don't. And 2 or 3 meals a day is not nearly as often as they eat in nature. So if you're feeding twice a day and now you add a third meal an hour before your bedtime, which gives them a little chance to kind of groom and calm down, you're decreasing the amount of time between meals and you're giving them a fuller stomach. So if they were waking up at 6, you could easily have bought yourself a couple hours.
My cat has the worst way of trying to wake me up, because she'll come in and she'll snuggle with me. I'm not getting up. You're snuggling with me. I am not getting up. We're in for the morning. But no, she's actually really pretty good. She's never been one to come and paw at me in the morning or anything like that. So I'm lucky with this one. So
and the last big one that I definitely want to ask is vocalization. I guess, is that a big one? Cats that are as my friend would say, sing the song of their people a little too much. Is that a big issue as well that you see?
Well, it is an issue.
Or here?
It definitely is an issue. Cats meow when they want something. This is, and I talk about cats being in the kitten-mother relationship with us. And that comes about from the idea that in nature, we know that kittens meow to their moms, right? And they meow and they purr and they rub and they want food, comfort, attention, maybe some play. And mom responds by giving them these things. But adult cats typically don't meow to other adult cats. They make all sorts of other sounds like chittering and caterwauling and trilling and hissing, growling. But meowing isn't common. But cats meow to us. And it is for that reason that we think we're at least partly in a maternal relationship with them. They meow, they purr, and they rub, and we give them food, attention, comfort, and play. And that is a good experience. So when cats meow, they want something. And so the thing to do generally is to figure out what's your cat want. It's when they want it constantly, or they want it when you don't want to give it. That's when we start to have problems. And there are some cats who are obviously just naturally more vocal than others. And some are talkers. But we really want to try and address why the cat is talking to us. And are we giving them enough of what they need? You can do something called extinction training. That's when you ignore a behavior that you don't like meowing across a closed door. The problem with extinction training, if a cat learns that they don't get what they want because the meowing doesn't work, they will eventually stop meowing. But extinction training can take a very long time. And there's something called an extinction burst, which means the behavior gets worse before it gets better. That's, again, going back to the slot machine effect, essentially.
My Sophie will meow at me at 5 o'clock. She's like an old guest up at the Catskills when I was a kid. And when the dining room opens, she wants her dinner exactly at 5 o'clock. If I'm working past 5, she doesn't care. If I'm on a Teams call at work, she will sit and stare at the camera to tell everyone else on the call. He'll be right back. At 6:30, if she doesn't get her treats, literally 6:30, as if she could tell time, she will sit in the kitchen, and she has kind of a smoker's meow. It's kind of it's a very raspy, like, yeah. It's like Roz from Monsters Inc. Like, you didn't file your paperwork. And she'll just do that to the point where you said other cats pick up or learn. Taylor will join her with his meow always sounds like he's asking a question, like,
Mm-hmm.
So you hear and until I give them treats, or I do what you said, that extinction. Sometimes I'm just like, all right, meow, I'll be with you when I'm there. Sometimes I do ignore it, but they have not stopped. She's been here 10 years. That hasn't stopped. And now he's doing it. So the two of them, my two oldest, she's 14, he could be 16. They're both sitting in the kitchen doing a duet for their treats. And sometimes I ignore it. Sometimes I'm like, all right, here, let's have treat time. And I make them run and bring it back. So when you were saying that extinction, that definitely struck a nerve with me.
So, the trouble with extinction training is if you're not answering the call, right? They're meowing at the door, and you're not answering it. And you're trying to be strong, and then you give in. All the work that you've done is lost. Every bit of it, it's all lost. You just taught your cat that they need to meow for 10 minutes, not 5.
Right.
And now it's going to be even harder. And studies, by the way, have shown that pet parents, cat parents, know their cat's meows and what they're saying better than just a random person who comes into their home and hears the cat meow. So, there are all sorts of different ways in which they talk to us.
My last cat also, part of the medical issues that he had, and I was trying to deal with this for a couple of years, really during COVID was when it kind of like, bubbled to the surface a lot. He was meowing, it was like 24 hours a day, but it wasn't just a meow. It was, and here's my impression. Okay. So I'm going to open up the floodgates. It was like, it was like a really, really, and then sometimes it sounded like a baby crying, and it would just be throughout the night. He would just be in a room looking at a wall somewhere and just making, and like, what is wrong with him? So I brought him in to the vet.
Looking at a wall.
It sounded like he was in pain, so I brought him to the vet. He did have, at that time, he had some tooth issues. So we dealt with the tooth issues, and then did a couple of extractions, and then he still kept doing it, brought him back. Oh, he has some inflammation, dealt with the inflammation, was still doing it, brought him back. And it was just like this nonstop, and it just kept getting worse. It never got any better. It wasn't for food or anything like that. It would just be, he would just be in another room. He'd be in the basement or in another room somewhere, just making these howling sounds up to this last year when he finally, it was, his last months, it was really bad. And come to find out he was in kidney failure. So he was obviously in pain. He was obviously dealing with something. At one point, the vet was like, well, we think he might even have, dementia, like kitty dementia, because it was just so odd the way that it wasn't a normal meow. Like you just said, you recognize kind of what their language is at a certain point as to what they want. And this was way beyond that. It was
certainly when a cat's vocalizations changes or progresses or gets worse, a vet visit is always in order. Cognitive dysfunction syndrome is a type of dementia that older cats can get, where they sometimes stare at the wall or wander in patterns and meow, especially at night.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just want social connection, right? Sometimes the thing that they want is you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was tough. It was tough with that guy. I think he came to me, they said he was about 10, and then I had him for about 8 to 10 years. So he was, he was up there. He wasn't a young one, so.
Yep.
Stephen, we could talk to you all day
Absolutely.
about this. This is absolutely, we're going to have you back on 100 times. We need to hear your impression now.
And his
Well,
story.
before that,
And
I have to correct the record on the Penelope story because my mind went to a different place. I tell different stories about cats that are meaningful to me. The Joplin tornado, other contexts with other cats. And if you saw all those different things, the webinars and the podcast, you'd see that they're all named Petunia, not Penelope. And you're like, well, what's going on? How can you be talking about Petunia and Joplin, and then you're talking about Petunia at the shelter? The truth of the matter is, whenever I meet a cat who is really important to me and doesn't actually have a name, I always name them Petunia, because that way I don't forget. All I have to do is say Petunia, and I've got the right cat.
Oh,
Anyway, I just wanted to correct the record for that. And I beg of you, don't make me do, I know I set you up for it. Don't make me do the cat vocalization until next time.
okay.
It will be chittering.
Fair enough.
I will chitter for you.
okay.
Or come to my webinar, and sometimes I've been known to do it on the webinar, just not record it,
Completely fair, which is a great way to, how do people find you? If they want to, hire your services or attend your webinar, what's the best way to find you? We've already said your
Right.
website.
I mean, some people find me by web searches, by articles that I'm quoted in, and things like. But that's kind of random, right? Come to my website, catbehaviorhelp.com. There's contact information there, and I always respond quickly, and we can discuss it and see what we want to do.
And you're on social media.
Yep, Instagram and Facebook at Cat Behavior Help, all one word. LinkedIn as well. I believe it's the same. Cat Behavior Help. And on TikTok, I kind of cross post a little bit to TikTok, and that's cat_behavior_help.
And the book.
Oh, yeah. So my husband and I have published in hardcover on Amazon and Barnes & Noble a children's book on cat behavior called Happy Comes Home.
Oh.
You can find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, autographed, signed copies from my website. And it's a sweet, sweet story about an orange cat. A family and their child Avery decide to go to a shelter, adopt the perfect cat that they named Happy, and they get Happy home, and it is a catastrophe. And they do a quick search on the internet, and they find this guy named Mr. Top Cat, who's a human-sized cat who strangely has blue and green eyeglasses, just like mine.
Who would have thought?
Who comes in to kind of save the day.
Oh,
That's awesome. So catbehaviorhelp.com. You've already been, on a personal note, my tailor is dealing with his dental issues. You've already been of great help to me with just advice and just, even just the moral support you've given me on a personal note. So, as if this podcast didn't vouch for you in and of itself, I can personally vouch for just how awesome you are, what a great help you are, and just, just putting things into perspective and just the advice. I could personally vouch for you.
It's very, very kind of you. I will tell you that the kind of headline on my website says, creating a happier world for cats and the humans who love them. And I will say to people, it's not a motto. It is a life calling.
Because it's all fixable is, I think, the overarching theme is none of this is insurmountable. None of this is not deserving of seeking you out, getting your advice, putting the effort in, working with the cat. And even like you said, if it comes to the point where the cat needs to find another home, that's an acceptable part of the process to make sure everybody's happy. There's a stigma. I failed. I have to return. That's even up to and including, I would assume you've advised sometimes.
Sure.
This is just, this ain't happening. You might have to consider rehoming.
But I want to mention one quick thing: is that there are three common emotions that people feel when they need to surrender an animal, and those emotions are failure, guilt, and loss.
Mm.
And what I can say is that the failure and the guilt should not be a part of the equation. There's no failure and there's no guilt. There may be loss, and I can't really help with that, but I'm here to tell you, you have not failed and you should not beat yourself up. You're doing the best you can, and now you're making a proactive decision that is an affirmative decision on behalf of all the animals and all the people to find a better solution.
Absolutely. Stephen, thank you so very much.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. It's a great conversation. Thank you so much.
It's been great having you on. We'll have you on again. We'll coax that impression out of you. There it is. There it is. Catbehavior.com. Find them on social media. And Stephen, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure being here with both of you, Michelle, Dan. A real great way to start my day today. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.